So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming along to our session today. It's always, you never know who's going to turn up when there's lots of competition for some wonderful sessions. So welcome everyone. For some of you, it's late in the evening. For some of you, it's early in the morning. And some of you got a decent time, which is in the Americas have around 5 p.m. your time. So thank you everyone for coming along. Before I begin, I'd just like to say my name's Annette Gray. And I am based in South Turramurra in Sydney, Australia. And this is the traditional lands of the Guringai people. And they've been living here for 70,000 years, where they've been living and hunting and looking after the land and the water. So I take this opportunity to acknowledge the traditional lands that you are all standing on right now, wherever it is around the world. So I think we've got a lot of continents covered in our session today. So welcome to this session. It's a session that's going to be co-facilitated with Alan Kay and Laura Shorey. Did I get it, Laura? Awesome. And we'll be sharing our experiences of solution-focused performance conversations. So we're just going to do a little bit of a bio background from each of us very briefly, and then Laura is going to take over and run you through what the agenda is and, you know, why an emphasis on performance reviews for our conversation today. So really brief background for me. I've been a leadership coach for 21 years now, and I also have been training leaders and mentors to use a coaching approach, solution-focused coaching approach, since I came across solution focus about 11 years ago, and have never looked back or love using it in every setting, and even with my family, and even with a close friend who's going through a hard time at the moment. It's just got multiple applications. So I'll hand over to you, Alan, to give a brief intro to yourself.
Thank you, everybody. That was my wife wandering around. Like Annette, we should welcome you to there are a number of Aboriginal groups here in Toronto, the Anishinaabe, amongst others. And so welcome you on their behalf to their land. I'm a fully recovered advertising guy. I spent 30 years in that business, realized I was finished, and went cold turkey to find out what it was I wanted to do. After about a year of reasonably good success, a colleague actually dug up Solution Focus, and we went to training as business people, and we started asking very different kinds of questions of our clients immediately, and the change for them was immediate. So that's my background, and I use Solution Focus. I've been using it for 20-something years in so many fronts. As I like to boast, the banks to children's aid, with a handful of very grumpy union leaders, et cetera, et cetera. Delighted to be here.
Thanks, Alan. Over to you, Laura.
Thanks, Annette. Welcome, everyone. My name is Laura Shorey. I'm based in basically the Toronto area in Canada. I was introduced to Solution Focus just last year, actually last summer, and went headfirst into a program with Dr. Hae-Sun Moon, who is the executive director of the Canadian Centre for Brief Coaching in Toronto, at University of Toronto. Completed that program, and part of my background is I left a long-term career in the insurance and financial services business, running my own business, and left that in 2017 to become a coach. And since then, I've been training diligently, learning all different methodologies around coaching. And it wasn't until I found Solution Focus that I thought, oh my gosh, this is what I want to be doing. It's probably the most simplest form of coaching, but the most difficult to actually do. And that's why I love it. And Alan was gracious enough to sort of take me under his wing, and I've been working with him and now Annette, and I'm so happy to be here with all of you and start experiencing more of what solution focus can do for organizations, because my goal is to try and change the conversations that we have in organizations for the better, for the well-being of the employees and for the benefit of organizations in general. So I'm really happy to be here.
If I could add to that, what we'll look at today is methods, frameworks beyond simple coaching. What we're going to look at is the coaching model, but it's used for specific tasks like performance reviews.
Yeah.
Thanks, Alan and Laura. Laura, you can continue then and provide the overview about what we're covering today. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Annette. So today, as Alan just mentioned, what we want to do is focus on an application of a solution-focused approach in the performance evaluation process in organizations. I mean, before we go into that, I just wanted to a little bit of background around performance evaluations and discuss what we're going to be discussing and giving an example of today is based on the work of Günter Luger, who is a professor of PEF, which is the Private University of Management in Vienna. In his words, he says an organization is a group of people engaged in organizing, which is a continuous process, even if sometimes we feel stuck. And he says it's a system. It's the product of the interaction of parts, not the sum of the parts, which will become very critical when we start talking about performance evaluations. So it stands to reason if we change conversations and we change questions and we change the responses, we're changing the language, and therefore we're changing how organizations function and have an impact on the system. Traditionally, when we think of a performance evaluation, just by definition, HR.com talks about it being a periodic review of someone's individual job performance. Another definition I have here is from the Business Development Bank of Canada, that states that it's a process of evaluating and documenting how well an employee is carrying out their job. Straightforward enough. Problem comes from the fact that they don't necessarily serve the function or the goal that they were intended. In a Harvard Business Review article in 2015, they talked about a survey done by on Fortune 1000 companies by Corporate Executive Board, and it stated that 66% of employees were strongly dissatisfied with the performance evaluations they received from the organizations, and more strikingly, 65% of the employees believed that performance evaluations were not even relevant to their jobs. So the question is, why are we doing these evaluations? And according to Gallup, only 14% of employees strongly agree their performance reviews inspire them to improve. So not only are they irrelevant in many cases, but they don't motivate employees to grow and develop. It also costs organizations millions of dollars to perform these activities yearly for very little in terms of impact and change for the organization or for the employees' results. In fact, traditional performance reviews and approaches to feedback can be so bad in some cases that they actually make performance worse. So today we're going to be talking about performance evaluations using a solution-focused approach in the intent that we want to, the performance evaluation is designed to affect change. And we want growth and we want development of the organization and the individual, but typically and historically, these processes and the way these forms are designed and the constrictions that are put around them for managers doesn't make that happen. So today, what we want to do is offer you an alternative to doing performance evaluations. And Alan will be demonstrating that with one of you, I believe. And we will also be talking about personal experiences of going through this type of process and how it impacts the individual. One thing about performance evaluations, we want people to be, I would think, performance evaluations, we want people to be motivated after they leave the discussion. We want people feeling creative and open and inspired to do better, to work better, to be better. And that can only help organizations. And up until now, before this type of approach, what we've been experiencing with performance evaluations is, in many cases, just the opposite. I think that's pretty much what I wanted to offer in terms of a preliminary sort of update on performance evaluations before we go forward. So Annette, I'll hand it back over to you.
Great, thank you, Laura. Just one thing I'd add to what you said around performance. So the language, performance evaluations, performance reviews, performance conversations, we're talking about the same thing. So whatever however you describe it in your organisation or workplace. I also wanted to acknowledge a few people who've come along today that I've invited along: Greg Parfitt, Victoria Doherty, and Sue Ellen. Are you able to rename yourself so we don't call you BBM? All of them are actually quite progressive in what they've done around their performance review process. So I think we can really learn a lot from them as well in terms of the progress they've made in being very non-traditional, but capturing all the things that we're going to be talking about in terms of solution-focused conversation. So I really want to bring them into the conversation when we get into it later on. And the other thing I wanted to add is, how do our adults learn? And adults learn in a way of what we're learning more about is self-discovery. And how do you create this conversation that is more about self-discovery so that they can self-reflect when they're doing their work, not when they're with you having the conversation if you're the manager of them or the leader of them. So the intent around the process is to help people self-reflect more, because the learning happens, 70% of the learning happens on the job. So how do you help people get better at what they're doing on their own without having someone trying to tell them what to do to get better? So yes, we have an article on pedagogy, which is the way adults develop and how they learn, that we could share with you as well. So let's get back into breakout rooms. Given you've been warmed up to the conversation and introduced to some of the people here, I want to put you back into breakouts to have a conversation briefly. We're going to have about 8 minutes, and I'm going to put you in groups of 3. And the conversation is around, what is your experience of performance reviews that went well? Either you were giving it or you were receiving it. So we're looking at the good ones, the ones that actually help change performance. Yeah, so reflect on that. Oh, thank you, Tamara. Your family is asleep. Okay, so happy for you to just listen in when you go into the breakouts. So then what we want you to do, so reflect on a good one that went well. And the other is, pick one thing that could be better or could be done differently or more of. I'll write this in the chat so that it'll come up as a message as well. So one that's gone well, what would make it even better, could do differently. So let me put you into the breakouts. And I'll probably, I'll recreate.
Did you want us, the two of us, to come in with the breakouts, or should we wait outside?
I think we wait outside for this one.
Good.
Okay, so 8 minutes total. I'll give you some countdown of time as well. So make sure you manage the time everyone gets part of the conversation. Some groups of 4 as well. Well done, folks.
Well, I'm going to be muted often just because my dogs are here and
Sure.
they're hungry.
No worries.
I'm going to be muted because my wife's hanging around. She wants me to have some soup. What?
Recording back on. Welcome back. Very curious to hear what the ones that went well, what was it about them that went well? And I forgot to give you an instruction to have someone from each group to present back. So I'd love you to volunteer the people in your groups to summarize some of the things that went well. When it did go well, what was it that went well? So happy to have people raise their hand to comment. Great, thanks, Kerry. And then Bobby Joe.
Thanks, Annette. Yeah, we had a wide-ranging chat, and I guess the trying to capture the salient messages that came through, it was first of all, which really came late in the conversation, was around to have productive performance conversations, you need to establish a culture where those sorts of conversations are encouraged and time is made for them to happen productively. That was the first point. The second key message that came through is that the conversations that work well are invitational. They, the evaluator or the supervisor comes with a curiosity that focuses on the strengths or what's working in their colleagues' work at present. You know, and inviting them to reflect on their success really, and then building on the success to further improve performance. And I guess the final comment was that through curiosity, the capacity for your colleague to self-direct beyond the conversation is much greater because they've actually named and owned both their strengths and areas to further enhance those strengths. So those of you in my group, have I missed anything that you want to add?
All good.
Great. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. And hearing some of the things you said is something that I'd love Vic to bring in later on about what you're doing in your organisation, because some of those things are, when I saw the documents that you sent through, that's part of your whole process, isn't it? And same with you, Greg. So Bobby Joe, what did you hear in your group and what's your experience of when it's done well?
Similar to Kerry, we did talk about the notion of review and whether a culture supports that or whether it's more a check-in and evaluation rather than something that's future focused as well. So that was similar. Having the performance review being more around a conversation rather that would be solutions focused in terms of whatever's working well now, what do you see in the year ahead that would make that even better. Less focus on the evaluator providing feedback to you about your performance and more on you sharing where you think you're at. We talked about too that it's good to have some, particularly for the person guiding the review, to have a range of strategies to keep the conversation going. Ian mentioned too that in his experience, having the conversation was richer than having to then, there was a slowing down when things had to be recorded online and documented, so that more time on conversation, less on perhaps documentation.
Ah, good point.
Yeah. Now, folks, anything else that I may have missed?
I think one of the things that you said, Bobby, was around the benefit of planning for yourself.
Oh, yeah.
So that was one of the things that went really well, was the time that you took to actually prepare for the conversation. So by the time it got to the conversation, it was actually like a performance of really a performance. But the good thing was the preparation time, which is the reflection time.
Nice.
Thank you, Ellen.
Yeah, thank you. Other groups, what were the ones that went well? No, got no other comments in terms of when it went well. What was your conversation about? Everyone's being shy.
And I'll give you a couple of comments.
Thank you, John.
We had again a wide-ranging conversation, which I think this sort of topic tends to generate anyway. The concept really of just asking people what's the assessment process for. We talked a little bit about a feedback cycle, which brings in then how frequently do you talk to people, and what a feedback cycle does is provide opportunity. And the question really to the assessor, because often the assessor is very focused on the person they're assessing, is what can the assessor get out of this conversation? What do they want to get out of this conversation? Because it's an opportunity to learn more about their people when in a very time constrained and stressful environment. Often they don't have the time to do that. We also talked about how difficult it is sometimes to give negative feedback, and sometimes whether there's actually a need to give negative feedback, or whether you can make that negative feedback irrelevant by focusing on positives. Sometimes it has to be given, and often the assessor is quite uncomfortable with how to do that and still keep the conversation overall, positive, forward-looking. There might have been some other things I can't remember. Emma, was there anything else that came up, or can't remember?
I think we talked about, a few people talked about the relational space, and how
Right.
a lot of, how effective some of these conversations are, as partly, or to a large extent, sometimes determined by the relationship and the trust between the person and their supervisor or manager, and how much they're going to get out of those conversations, or how even the mindset they take into those conversations.
Yeah, I think that was a very good point as well, the whole relationship side. I find that a lot of performance reviews can be linked to reward, either financial bonuses or whatever, and that can often be the focus of the conversation. And ideally, if you can take that element out of it and deal with that separately, then it can make the conversation a lot more positive.
Yeah.
Because otherwise that becomes the sole focus. And if you don't get the bonus you want, then it immediately becomes a negative. I don't like bonuses anyway, period. But it becomes a negative slant to the conversation.
Well, then we all know what the bonus structure has done for behaviour.
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so we might move on. Thank you, John. We might move on, and Alan, do you want to frame up, what do you think should be the purpose of performance reviews and performance conversations? Over to you, Alan.
The purpose should be organizational growth. And if you've got 100 people, you ought to be able to see what growth they're going to make in order to contribute to the organizational growth. It kind of leads back to that old-fashioned bonus model where you give people bonus for sales and all that kind of stuff, and it doesn't result in good stuff. The second one is the organizations, because of the pandemic, etc. I'm very impressed with the people in HR are doing these days, because they used to be very administrative, and now the C-suite is asking them to think more about the development of people, particularly as the dropout rate is very high and the recruiting effort has to be much better. So there's a lot of good stuff in there, setting the stage for even better performance reviews. The one we're going to look at, Gunter did it a few years ago. He did a lot of research, et cetera, et cetera. I would say this, and it's a great framework, and I've used it many, many times. And I can't tell you a number of times of people, particularly the ones that were out of work and had lots of interviews and not much had happened, when I did the review with them and they figured out what they wanted to talk about in their next interview, they got the job. So it has a really profound impact in the short term. Anything else I can say? should we do the example?
Yeah, sure. So what we're going to see in a moment is Alan's going to conduct a, just let me get this up, conduct a performance conversation using this rating tool. Yeah. So what I'd like you all to do, if you could all draw this, if you've got note paper there, draw these headings. So we've got 3 columns. One is scope for improvement, one is okay, one is good, one is fantastic. And what I'd like you all to do right now is, if you were to think about your own performance in your current role at work, what percentage of points would you put across these categories? So you have 100 points, and we want you to allocate out of those hundreds, how much of the time is in fantastic, how much is in good, how much is in okay, how much is in scope for improvement. And you can decide where your points go. You don't have to have them across all 4 categories. You can have all of them in one category if you think you're in happy, how your performance is going is all the time fantastic, that's fine. But be realistic and honest around, how do you think you're going and what points would you allocate across that? So you're going to watch Alan now demonstrate doing this with someone. So what I would like you to do is record down what questions Alan asks under each category as he goes through unpacking this with someone. So note his questions and note his responses. How does he interact with the person as well? So look at both lenses as you're watching this. So what I would like to do now is I stole this from Paul Z. Jackson, and it's called the warm-up scale. And so how warmed up are you for Alan to be, to unpack your rating, yeah, your own rating and how you're going in your performance. So if you have your screen off, could you put it on or put it in the chat? If this is 10 up here, which is pick me, pick me, pick me, I would like to be the person that Alan works with. Here is, I'll do it if no one else puts their hand up. And down here is, I'm going to keep my screen off, then there's no chance I want to have the conversation. So when I go 3, 2, 1, I want to see your hand somewhere there. For the people who have your screens off, put a number on a scale of 1 to 10. 10 is being, yes, pick me. 5 is, you're lukewarm. And 1 is, yeah, don't want to take your video off. Okay, 3, 2, 1, put your hand somewhere on the screen. Okay, we've got a few. Oh, Emma's a 7, okay. How about we select you, Emma, given you are up.
Did you see my, what I said though? I said 7 if I don't need my screen on, because I'm in a work environment where I can't have it on.
Okay. Good point. I might then go for someone else. Is that okay, Emma?
Yeah, totally.
So I'm wondering who, you're going to have to help me again with where your hands were. So who was, there was quite a few midway. So yeah, I might go for Safina. You're at midpoint. And what you all might like to do is up on the top right-hand corner of your screen is the view. You may like to put it on speaker view so that you can see Alan and Safina quite easily. So just pop that onto speaker view and I'll hand it over to Alan to have this conversation with Safina. Alan, you ready to go?
Yeah. So who am I working with?
Me.
Okay,
Hi, me,
Sabina.
Safina.
Hi, Sabina.
Alan, did you want to just put it on speaker view and then you can see her more easily? Top right, it says view,
Yep.
top right, and then select
Yep.
speaker view.
Got it. Hello, Safina.
Hi.
Hi. So that piece at the top of the chart, which we'll look at the rest later, how can I be useful to you in unpacking why you would do it that way?
I'm not sure I got the question. To unpack what?
The numbers out of 100,
Mm-hmm.
et cetera, because you can get quite dramatically different numbers from people. In fact,
Mhm.
sometimes the boss's numbers are very different from the employees. How is it useful to be able to do it that way?
How it would be more useful for me to do it this way, that I rate myself with 100
That's one way
points.
to look at it. Yep, yep.
Is that what you mean?
Mm.
Well, depends on what way would it be more useful than what would the alternative be?
Yeah.
So the alternative in my context would usually be that I have a long list of criteria where I have to rate myself, and I have to hand it in beforehand, and the boss does the same thing, and then they put them side by side and just mark the ones where we differ, and we only talk about those, and the rest goes as not interesting because we see it the same way. So that's the procedure I know. And I think this is nicer because it gives more room for exploring, because we don't know what's behind which criteria are behind.
And also the solution focused line, sometimes you look at them and the numbers they seem to be exaggerated, either one end or the other. The notion is take it seriously because it's just one piece of information, not to be intimidated if an employee has a much better view of themselves, or the other way around, they think their boss thinks this way. And it is just a guide to help the conversation. And we'll talk later about if somebody has a very negative view of themselves, there are lots of tools down the scope for improvement and okay that you can use from the first two columns to say, well, when you were having trouble with X, give me an example from the first column or the second column where it wasn't a problem. So it allows you to go across looking for resources. So Annette, do you want me to go on to the main screen, the main piece?
Mm-hmm. Yes, please. Yeah, so do the demonstration.
Yeah, are we going to put that one on the screen?
You want it on the screen,
Yeah, the piece that we fill in.
Sure.
Well, that's the first one. So you see it across the top there, and you'll notice I've underlined the word future performance rating. I've always used that myself because the ultimate goal is to get them to focus on the future, not the problems they think they've got at the moment. So tell me, Sabina, if your boss was to tell me, assume you've got one, or a leader, tell me that your performance is fantastic, what would they tell me goes in there? Just give me a couple of examples.
They would say that I I'm always there. I'm very reliable. I jump to the occasion if there is like an emergency.
Yep. Good. So we go on asking that question for a while. What would your colleagues?
And I try to.
Sorry.
Yeah. Well, that I try to have a good relationship with my students. I'm a teacher, so just
that's good.
So you know.
I just wanted a few examples just now. We would go on asking under fantastic, what would your colleagues tell me? As a teacher, what your students tell me? And quite often I put in, what would your friends and family tell me? Because sometimes that reveals social skills they are using too much of or little at work. It's a skill issue. And then we go to good, which I say to folks tends to be around mechanical stuff, like I'm very good with Excel sheets, et cetera, but also behavior. And we're looking for, in those first two columns, behaviors, attitudes, and skills. When we get to okay, I give them an example of mine, which is I'm not very good at finance. I never have been. And when I started my own business, I noticed that finances were a bit messy. What did I do? I outsourced it. I got somebody to do it for me. And that's only one way of looking at under okay. Find another resource to get it done, or develop your skills in the elements are under okay. What would you're getting a review, what would they use? One thing you would say is okay about your performance.
You mean as an only okay?
Yeah.
Only okay is I'm not very good at remembering the correct procedures and regulations and stuff, but it's still okay because if I don't know, I just ask somebody.
Exactly. And if it was a more critical one, you'd put a higher number up under okay. Again, we could say, was there any time during the good and fantastic performance that you did make it happen, or you were part of making it happen? How did you manage to do that? Oh, okay. So you're trying to modify the okay, and particularly for scope for improvement, without embarrassing yourself. What would be one thing that folks would tell you there's scope for improvement? Just an example.
With handling paperwork, I'm horrible at handling paperwork. Good.
And so we'll see later what we do with that one, that particular example. It's not necessarily about bearing down on them to make scope for improvement and okay better. It's about finding ways around it to leverage good and fantastic. So imagine, I'll show you a sample in a minute of a completed form. What you do then is you say to the person, let me read the fantastic and good columns, and you read it out and exactly the words they used because you've been writing it down, and you go to number 5. So what would others say is the essence of your success in this area? You're not going to discuss 3 and 4 for now. What's the essence? And you get them to blurt out a few words, and you help them maybe turn it into a sentence. You don't give them ideas, but how do you connect these thoughts into a current state? And that's the essence. Then you can turn to the solution-focused future performance review. The question, suppose more of the above happened in the future, what would you do to make it even better? My line is, I'm Harry McPotter, the Scottish wizard, and I put you to sleep one night and you had a dream during the night, and in that dream you were doing exactly what you wanted at work and things that were much better. I'm following you around the next day. Tell me about what you're now doing at work. So you're helping them paint a picture of what they want to get to. And again, they'll probably give you 4 or 5 words. You can string it out a wee bit into more of a sentence. And then we go to number 7, which is, for some people, a bit intimidating. Suppose the above were no longer an issue in the future, what would you be doing instead? That's all. And they can choose, well, I don't do that anymore, I've gone to school or whatever. It's up to them. Any comments so far? We'll go to number 8 in a minute. Safina.
No.
Good.
That's pretty clear, but the 5 and 6, they only are about good and fantastic, because here they are also under okay, but.
Yes, but number 7 allows the person to add in things they might want to do to correct. Now, before we go to number 8, it's not on the chart. I've added it in for years. I'll show you in the written example. I then say to people, Harry McPotter, I'm having a glass of Prosecco with you at an event to celebrate your career. And somebody comes up to you and says, Safina, there's one thing, I have an offer to you. It's a job, it's a task, whatever. And it's what you've always wanted to do. It comes from deep inside. So I asked them, what's that? And of all the things you take seriously, not literally, I remember the president of a large international company saying to me, I'll be running a horse farm with my family. And you can work off of that. Oh, well, what did you do to get to that? Blah, 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 blah. Now you're ready. They've got some context for the long term. Is number 8. What's first small steps might we make today to make progress right away? And of course, if they tell you, well, next year, you say, well, tell me what you might be doing next week. Small steps. So it's the framework of solution focus put into a written format. I don't say this is the only way to do it. I'm just very pleased that Gunter came up with this one and that it has worked so well. I'm watching our time. Just one comment about what you've heard so far. How would you see this being useful to you if somebody was to offer it to you?
Are you asking me or everybody?
Yes, Safina.
Well, I think we should make our, as I'm a teacher, not a supervisor, I think we should, instead of handing out report cards, it would be very useful to have this kind of conversation with students.
Yeah,
but,
thank you.
I have a long way to go before we establish that in Germany anyway.
Yes, of course, Germany. But what you just said, I think is profoundly important. Solution focus to me is a teaching model, because that's my daughter in Montreal. Teaching today is more about the learning capabilities, the special learning needs, etc., of the individual. And so this model here, I think, accomplishes that. Before we hand it back, Annette, could you show us the written example on the screen? You'll see I've written somebody's name up at the top, and the first question you ask is, how do you see this being useful to you? So you've got a sense of where to follow. And this person had said, continue learning, interviews, what to say, because they must have been thinking about their next job. Again, please excuse the Scottish chicken scratch. Look at that one down in the corner here, long term, my own company, reliable, remote, whatever the words are there. That then takes you back to number 8, reorganize my skills, blah, blah, blah. Surprised they didn't put a second one, doesn't matter. And then at the end, you say to them, what could be useful? How do you see this being useful to you? Again, insightful, what I do want, can provide, refrain, etc., etc. So it's helping them recognize the value they've got from the session. Annette.
Yes, thank you. I'm just going to comment, if you notice here on this example, there's a lot more notes under the fantastic and good than there are in the okay and scope for improvement. So through this example, go on.
Sorry, and look at the number, 25, 40, 20, and 15. So this was, I won't say easy case, but much easier to work with. Sorry.
Yeah. So I'm curious, Safina, what numbers did you have, if you're okay to share, what numbers did you have in each of the categories, if you're comfortable in sharing?
I actually had 50% under fantastic.
Yeah.
So
Good.
yeah, and then 20 under okay and good, and only 10 under scope for improvement.
Nice, nice.
So I'm bloody marvelous.
Well, that's what we wanted to reflect and unpack. So
Can I ask a quick question? Excuse me. Does the on those numbers, does the person fill those numbers in first? So those numbers are there, and then you start, Alan, then you start that process where number one, you're looking at the fantastic and what would it be described. So the numbers are there, sort of brought to the meeting, and then it starts from there.
Yeah, on the handout, which we have, I assume we'll let you have it, there's a second page which explains the order in which to do stuff. Putting the numbers in is, you just say it's your first impression, or it's what your boss might have told you, etc., etc. It's just the beginning. If you and sometimes again you'll see some frightening numbers. Somebody thinks they're 90% perfect, and other people think they're 90% screwed up. Don't let that put you off.
Sure. No, got it. Okay, but then they come with that, and then the questions start almost irrespective of what the numbers say, but that gives you your kind of starting point.
Gives you a key, but it's best to not get too serious about the numbers. The line is they know more than they know. More is working than not. Our job is to extract that from them. That was my timer.
Bang on time.
over to you, Laura.
Sorry, I've got a question. Can I just ask, with that, even if someone had nothing in the fantastic one, would you still ask them what their boss would say if they?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
And as you go through the columns, you can say, that sounds like your boss might have appreciated that. Can we move that over? You know, you're looking for ways to help them learn about the resources they've got. You're not prescribing. You're helping them understand the resources they've got.
Right. Yeah, go, Laura.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Alan. So this was very quick to go over what would happen in a normal evaluation. And both Annette and I actually went through a full process with Alan individually. And I know that, Annette, you've done some of this process with a few people in the room today as well. So in terms of looking at this process, what do you feel would be useful for an organization to use this tool or use evaluations in this way? Alan started off by saying the purpose of evaluation is to grow the business, to develop the business.
I wouldn't mind getting Greg in here, because Greg, you've experienced this as an individual when I did it with you, and you also have experienced your team use this approach. Do you want to add some input in terms of what you experienced from it?
I guess the first time when I did it with you was, it kind of happened by mistake. We were filling some time, and you were pretty excited about the stuff. And I sort of immediately afterwards said, I'd like you to come and teach my team this as a kind of booster for coaching training. And I think the feeling I had during the conversation was, like, it's easy to talk about your strengths ultimately. And if you're ever going to get anyone kind of on the front foot, so to speak, and really thinking about themselves in a positive way, it's a good framework for that. So, whilst we went into it, I wasn't quite sure where we were going, because it wasn't set up that way. I very quickly got into it. found it like pretty easy to share and to look forward, I guess, and then to look forward in a positive way, leveraging your strengths. And I thought the process worked really well in that regard. And I mean, if you want to sit there and have someone take some ownership, look forward, obviously leverage their strengths and feel good about themselves and grow through that, I think, I'd say it was effective. We have kind of, both times we've benefited from your assistance, and that we've been going into our major reviews, and I think everyone sort of found a bit more the better conversations on the back of utilizing some of the stuff.
Thank you. Hebe, you've just made a comment here in the chat. Follow up, evaluate, feedback, reflection, and high level of communication. Yes. Yeah, that's what it's about. I thought I'd bring in Vic here, because your process that you've developed is very much in some of the same principles that we're offering here. Wanting to your input in terms of how did you get to that point of developing a process like that?
Yeah, I think we got to that point in the various organisations by stepping back around what is it that we're trying to achieve more broadly, and how do we leave behind what we think are the constructs of what it looks like, and look at where things naturally flow. And if you can mirror where you feel really comfortable, then that's going to be more effective more broadly. So an example which I didn't share with you, Annette, but it could be helpful, is, when a conversation is going really well, you have a level of connection and a context of where you're sort of catching up. And then you're sort of then getting some visibility of, acknowledgement of the past, or some sort of a level of awareness where within the conversation, you are getting awareness of how the other person's going. You're personally getting awareness of yourself and the context of where you're in. And then if you're thinking about a growth conversation or a solution-focused conversation, it moves into that sort of possibilities and path all the time, finishing up around that whole, how do we leverage the strengths and what are the steps that you take forward? And so in some ways, it feels a little bit like, other coaching models. But if you really construct a conversation, whether it's a conversation in the street where you're relating with someone who you haven't seen for a while, or a conversation about a business performance, if you monitor what's happening when it's going really well, you're often going through those phases. So how do you help people connect into those and find the questions that give them access to information that for the individual, they have further access to information, and someone who's coaching or leading, they're also eliciting that and getting a broader picture. From a point of view of thinking about how do you design a system, it's looking at elements of, what are you trying to achieve? And from our organisations, we have a philosophy of thinking about, organisational performance and individual performance. And I think that's pretty normed in most orgs. But when you start to look at organisations who are sort of punching above their weight, they're really focused in on that team performance. So how do you sort of set those elements up? When I think about performance, there's so much driven around assessing performance. And really the whole goal is to accelerate performance. And so what are the conditions for success of accelerating those? And so when you think about areas that sort of grow that, it's often that, as we've talked about here, it's around that sort of strengths focus. It's about the regularity of conversations. It's about a focus on attention versus assessment. It's about looking at the elements of how might we take this forward? How do we course correct in real time? And so organisationally, it's, the types of things that we've tried to do is, make it simple, forward focused, strengths based, conversations in time, but all the time really sort of champion and recognising the impacts that people are making, and keeping, if you need to keep a record, making it digital and easy to find. And at the end of the day, we're trying to create future levels of performance, enabling those. That's really what the performance systems are about. And how do you create impact and to deliver contribution for all stakeholders? And so it's about uncoupling the things that often you take for granted and sort of reseeding those and reorganising it in a different way. I think I've spoken for a long.
That's all right. Just one follow-up question. So what difference is it making to the individuals and the organisation?
Well, look, within the organisations where we've introduced those, and look, it's not one thing that you're introducing. What you're getting is, really higher levels of performance where often on any sort of measure, organisational performance, you're seeing lifts, whether it's sales growth, whether it's operational efficiency, whether it's revenue or delivering against, in the organisation that I work now, it's about delivering against purpose and outcomes for our key clients. So you do see those, but I think more importantly, you're seeing people accelerate their own performance and moving and taking greater opportunities. And then them feeling a high level of engagement. So in my experience, when you shift from being a performance framework that's really just feeding everything else and assessing performance to drive a whole range of other human factor systems, to actually focusing in on the conversations that help you get better at being you, what you get is people feel much more engaged. And so, and people really don't want to be assessed. They just want attention. And so how do you help them? How do you set up conversations that help people recognise what their unique contribution is, and what is it they want more of, and how do you help create the conditions where they get that?
Love it.
And people are fabulous. The reality is, I think most people are always trying to do the best thing that they possibly can.
Yeah.
And we get in the way of it. And so how do you just uncouple things to help them be really effective at who they are? Yeah. And people really stretch when you sort of give them, I guess, the encouragement and context, and sometimes it's support and capability and, helping them course correct. But it's all done with positive intent.
Great. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. John, you've got your hand up. Do you want to make a comment here?
Yeah, just briefly. Vig expressed that really well, and it just generated a few thoughts in my head. The bottom line of these conversations is really that we want everyone to succeed. We want individuals to succeed, our team to succeed, our company to succeed. So the message is all about constant reinforcement, which I think is what sort of Vic was alluding to, is just, you're constantly trying to encourage. And I love that term she talked about, accelerating performance. I'll just add to that, in the right direction. And it may well be that when you're having, you can term what potentially is a negative, i.e. this person doesn't fit with our company. But in the context of talking about accelerating individual performance, it might well be that their best place is not with this company. So there's still the focus of the conversation. And yes, we're trying to make you successful, but your acceleration is best somewhere other than here. Not because we don't like you, but it's not quite working. So no, thank you.
And the line, John, the line there is, it's our job to help them be successful somewhere else.
Yeah.
By sending them away, we still have a responsibility. We know they don't fit here, but our job is to help them find something that does work. And you can use content of the performance review, whatever.
Exactly, and it gives you an indicator. If we go back to that rating system, if they have more points in scope for improvement, it generally indicates they're either new to the role or wrong fit for the role. So then that's a conversation.
And it wasn't such a great hire in the first place, which goes back to recruiting skills, etc.
Exactly. Emma, you've got your hand up. Sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a quick question about performance. And I think with some conversations that we're having at the moment within police, trying to shift the focus or not so much shift the focus, but change the perspective of away from individual performance to sort of collective performance, because, one person, we've got 15,000 staff, and one person's performance is, or in any organisation probably, impacted by so many things like their own state of mind, the team dynamics, the organizational culture, blah, blah, blah. Do you feel like, I'm just curious about you guys' experience, do you feel like having these kinds of conversations helps shift that those conversations to a more, what can we do to help you improve your performance, rather than it being on that one person to feel that, you haven't done this right, why didn't you do this properly? Do you think that these kind of conversations lead to a shared responsibility of helping each other succeed?
I'd actually like to bring Sue Ellen in here. Sue Ellen is CEO of a company, but was a head of people in a not-for-profit organisation. So, Sue Ellen, what's your take on, if you want to have a stab at answering Emma's question?
Yeah, I thought it was a really good question, an observation of it, and it's particularly hard in large organisations, I think. But I really believe that we change our world, whether that's within our organisation, our community, our family, whatever it is. We change our world one conversation at a time, and I think that's really important, because those types of conversations, whether that you're having them with an individual in this case, people talk. That's how we, that's how culture's built. It's by what we do, how we do it, and the conversations that take place around that would send a message, a very strong message. If someone has a really good experience in that conversation, they feel empowered, energized, encouraged, they feel recognized, and feel like they belong. Belonging is a really important thing. And this type of conversation helps them to feel that. Then that just radiates from them to everyone else around them. And so I think it's a really important part of creating the culture, because if you think of the opposite of that, if people are having a negative experience around this type of conversation, then that also permeates. People think, oh my, and you've heard it, oh my God, here we go again, it's that time of year or whatever it might be. And it just has a negative impact on people's overall sense of well-being and ability to perform going forward. So yeah, I think it's really important in any organisation to be really clear about what the purpose of the conversation is, what the purpose of the performance review, performance management system is, because these are conversations, but it's in the context of a much broader system. And, when you think about it, it's a management system. It's traditionally been a way of controlling what happens. And this is a shift in thinking around that and bringing humanity into the workplace, which is where it should be.
Yeah.
But I think it's kind of, giving us the tools to be able to acknowledge that and make it real for people is what makes them feel like they can do a great job.
I love what you said about humanity, because ironically, that's our commissioner's, one of his bylines is humanity in every interaction. And although that's sort of aimed at engagement with the public, it's actually, well, what about inside the offices as well?
Well, it starts inside first. So
Yeah.
how you treat each other internally is ultimately reflected in how we all treat our customers. So that's I'm pleased they're saying that.
And if I could add into this last piece about the police or whatever, you can use this, and I have, with an organization. I remember one, it was only about 11, 12 people, marketing services. They had a huge whiteboard. We did it on a whiteboard together so that they could align themselves more effectively with their clients and work together more efficiently. And the last point is, it's not so much performance review, it's assessment of resources the individual's got to keep moving forward and help them grow.
I just add to that too, what it was, Sue Ellen, what you were saying, the word how they feel comes up a lot. So emotions are a big part of this. And it's not about facts and figures and numbers and so on. It's how people feel in the organization. It's how motivated they are. And how do we create that motivation? How do conversations, use of language, allow people to feel like they belong, to feel motivated, to feel like they are contributing? And when they feel that way, then their behavior is going to shift. It's going to change. So I love what you were saying, Sue Ellen. It's not about teaching or telling. It's about allowing people to feel something different than what they have in the past.
I want to go back to you, Sue Ellen. You recently started in your organisation and they're at that performance review, part of the cycle. And you asked a question around it. Do you want to share what you told me the other day about shifting their perspective?
I can't remember what that comment was, Annette, but I think what we did do was, I don't like forms. I don't like any sort of thing at all around performance review systems, to be honest. And I've worked with them for many, many years. But what I did do was to say, let's just get rid of that and let's just have a conversation. And I just put two things down. I said, did you do an awesome job? Or do you need some help with some aspect of it? And that was the only two things that we had. And the whole focus was on, their reflections on what they felt like they'd achieved, throughout this time. And, because I hadn't been there for that whole time either. So it really, was around encouraging them to do their own reflection on their strengths, what they've been able to contribute, and helping them to feel really, really positive about moving forward after what had been quite a difficult time for the team over the last 12 months. But if there was something specific, I said, Annette, I can't remember what that was.
I think you said to me about how you got them thinking, well, what is the purpose of what we're trying to do here? Because I think you said that they were very much in the form filling part of the process rather than the actual conversation.
Yeah, that had been their experience in the past. They had to, fill it out, and there were lots of different boxes to fill in, and ways of tracking what they were doing. Yeah, I think that someone said it before about keeping it really simple. Those sorts of things I think need to be really, really simple, because really it's about, expecting the best. I always expect the best of everyone, and believe that everyone has the ability to live into that. And that's usually what happens. And then if something doesn't happen like that, then you deal with that specific situation or instance at the time, and has nothing to do with this actual performance process.
That's right. Thank you. John, you've got your hand up, and then I'll go back to Vic, because I like the comments that you've said in here, and I'd like you to share some of that. So, John.
I just love what Sue Ellen's saying, because she's challenging the givens here. I mean, I would actually completely take away the evaluation processes, because we've got a conceived idea of what that is all about. Because many will talk about the culture of a feedback cycle or a feedback loop, and I think that's what is worth introducing. Back in my flying days, it was something you always did, was to debrief as a team. I don't know how often that's done in companies. Not very often. We debrief individuals, but we don't often get the team together and debrief the team on every particular activity that's done. It's only a short process, but when the team debriefs as a whole, you can highlight what was good and bad about what was done. You can pick up on particular individuals and their successes. You can see how you can make better uses of some of the resources. It's all a positive reinforcement of where the strengths are. And people can see where their own weaknesses were, and they can reach out for help and all that. So that whole culture where feedback, it goes beyond the individual, into the team, into the company, and so on. I tried that in my last company. It was working pretty well, to be honest. And it's the military the flying world in particular is a really good example of how that works well. And what you've got to do is to take away the financial aspect of it. If you're unfortunate enough to have bonuses in the company, then keeping that separate, putting it against specific goals, so it's clearly black and white whether somebody gets something. Because at the moment, I think while that's mixed in with a kind of evaluation or a feedback cycle, it really pollutes it. But what Sue Ellen's doing, I think, is wonderful. That's great.
Emma, I'm just going into the chat. You've put a message here. Suppose you could design a performance evaluation process at work that truly leaves yourself, your staff feeling uplifted, motivated, and appreciated. How would you design it? Yeah, and then you said, I think this is it. Yeah, great comment. I think it's time we go. Vic, could you just make a comment around what you put in the chat there? Is that how you're actually rating in your system?
Sometimes I've taken ratings completely out. It depends on where the organisation is, and I personally don't have a strong desire to have ratings. But just picking up your 4-point scale, I thought using language where people talk about, you sort of know people who've, you say fantastic, but you sort of know people who knocked it out of the park. And that maybe that's an Australian context, so apologies for other places. There's some more localized term where you go, they're awesome. And or that was really awesome. How do you put that language back into performance rather than making it artificial? And equally at the other end, well, we're just not up to scratch yet. We need to sort of lift a bit versus saying actually we're going to do improvement. I think, and again, this has been raised by many in the group today, is the language that we use really helps the conversation either be highly effective or moves away from it. So.
Thank you. Well, I'm conscious of time. I'd like you pop you back into breakouts. What are you thinking now in terms of performance conversations, reviews? What are you thinking now? What are you taking away with you? And what might be a small step that you might take back into your own work context? So let me put you back in just for a few minutes before we wrap up at in a few minutes. Whoop, wrong one. I'm going to just put you in the same breakouts as you were previously. What are you taking away and what might be your next small step? Have you clicked on it, Kerry?
Yep. As far as I'm concerned, I'm here. I can see myself.
No, but you haven't gone into the breakout.
Where am I meant to click?
It should have come up asking you to go in.
No.
That's all right. I'm going to put you in a breakout. Got it now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Did Elizabeth get left hanging there?
I don't think she must be there because, yeah, I've allocated her a room, but she...
Some people had to pop off too, they mentioned in the chat, so some of the groups might be a little different.
They're all good. Yeah, they're all good.
Okay.
Yeah. Good conversation.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it's just getting started.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
I felt there was some, not resistance, but lack of appeal in the language. All I say is modify the language to suit the nature of the organization. You've got heavy sales team, modify the language. Very soft customer service, modify the language. And remember, what you're doing is not telling them they're good or bad, but helping them identify the resources they've got to move forward. And how you do that, it can be a dozen different ways. This is just one framework to get you started.
Well, I like what Sue Ellen was saying about focusing on why are we doing this in the first place? Like, what's the, what are we trying to achieve here? Because if you're getting a negative response and demotivated people, then obviously that's not what we want. So we need to change the behavior. And what I was hearing a lot of was, what we're activating is that lack of the stress response in people when they're having a conversation. So we're not focusing on gaps and weaknesses and to-dos and all of that stuff, which stress people out and activate that response, which is very demotivating. I can't, I mean, so many conversations I've left where I've just felt heavy, like just weighted, like, oh my gosh. Even though they may have said things that are positive, I still feel weighted after leaving that. Yeah, thank you very much for all that, but now we need you to do this kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Or it's skimmed over, all the good stuff skimmed over. Yeah, that's generally what people's experience.
We want this. So Thank
Yeah.
you very much for doing that. But now we want you to increase the bar even more and do this.
Yeah. I'm going to bring
But
them back now. Sorry to
Yep.
cut you off, Laura. I'm going to bring them back because so we can finish. Well, what time are we finishing? Am I getting the time wrong?
Four
I think
minutes.
it's 6:40.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I am getting it right. Yeah, so we got 4 minutes to go, so I'll bring them back.
Really good comments in the chat if you've been following through.
Yeah,
Yep.
I was quickly glancing at them. Yeah.
I was going to read some.
Well, you went on mute, Laura. You went on mute.
I was just saying that I was going to interrupt and sort of read off some of them for you, but I wasn't sure if you wanted to be interrupted. But yeah, there's a lot of nice comments in there.
Yeah, about good conversations.
Started getting conversation going, like people started getting to the heart of it.
Yeah.
And now we have to end,
Yeah.
which is like a coaching session.
This meeting is being recorded.
Welcome back. So just to wrap up, final comments. So what are you left with and what might you do next based on this conversation? Kerry, Kerry Glass, you came in halfway through. What have you enjoyed about the conversation and what might you do next? Just unmute yourself, Kerry.
Hello. I'm sorry I came in late, but it's early here. I just enjoyed actually that fundamental point that Sue Ellen made, amongst the many wonderful points she made, about this is about belief in people, that they can rise. And that applies to everything in life. And if we don't believe they can rise, it doesn't matter what system we have.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you. The final comments.
Sorry, I was just going to add to that it's not about fixing people. Right?
Exactly.
And I'd like to add, every organization's got grumpies, as I call them, angry people, for whatever reason. This performance review, or models like it, help them move forward. They're not probably going to change their behavior a lot, but it helps them move forward.
Thanks, Alan. Kerry, you were going to say something. Kerry McIver.
Thanks, Annette. Look, the word that came to me as I've been reflecting on this wonderful time together is flourishing. It's about people flourishing in our organisations so that our organisations continue to grow and improve. And there's a real humility and a privilege in being able to work with others and see them flourish.
Nicely said. Well, thank you so much, everyone. We are right on time. And thank you for your conversation, for your contribution. And for some of you, it was a very early start. For some of you, it was a very late finish of your day. But thank you so much for coming along. Alan and Laura, would you like to make a final comment before we close off today?
Just briefly. Just briefly, that there will be on the SF24 website, we'll be providing links to some of the references made today, and this recording as well will be posted at some point. So for those people that wanted to make it, couldn't make it, there's opportunity for them to watch later on. And thank you everybody for contributing and participating and showing up at various hours of the day for everyone. It's been wonderful. And I was just saying in the breakout that I felt like we were just getting started to the meat and potatoes of this, and it would have been lovely to continue on to get into more details with all of you. So thank you.
And I would like to pitch in Solution Focus and other Agile, et cetera, we can change a lot of the processes, the interview process, for recruiting, both for the interviewer and the interviewee, and so on and so on. There's so many of these processes that we don't particularly like because they're not been very well managed in the past. We can modify them, we can make them so much better to help the organization and the individual.
And on that note, thank you so much for coming along to our session today. Do jump into other regions' sessions, especially the Australians. The Australian section is going to start at 11 a.m. and goes till, can't remember, 5 o'clock, I think it is, Kerry, before we hand it over to the Asian area to pick up their part of the 24-hour conference. So thanks everyone coming along. Really enjoyed the conversation. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, Carrie.